We will not lose sight of our mission. This targeting will only embolden our resolve. Our warriors are strong, and we will not back down until our capital and our cities are secure.
At 4:17 a.m., the Caribbean remained wrapped in darkness as the USS George Washington advanced at a steady 20 knots, its deck silent, systems humming with the precision only a U.S. carrier strike group maintains before sunrise, appearing routine until 3 Venezuelan fast patrol ships exploded out of the dock, engines straining as they cut aggressively across the carrier's bow and snapped into a tight V-shaped barrier, a maneuver designed less for naval effect and more for television optics back in Caracas, following classic intimidation geometry meant to provoke reaction rather than combat. Yet the carrier did not alter course because a 100,000-ton warship does not swerve for theater, raising the real question of whether the move was a test of American steel or simply a hunt for propaganda footage. A provocation unfolding within Operation Southern Spear, a months-long U.S. pressure campaign that expanded destroyers, cutters, surveillance aircraft, and carrier groups across the southern Caribbean to strangle drug routes tied to the Maduro regime, turning the ocean into the forward edge of U.S. border security. As Washington labeled Venezuelan-linked cartels narco-terrorist networks and authorized aggressive interception before narcotics ever neared Florida, leaving Caracas desperate for distraction without risking a war it could not survive, so it chose close-in visual provocation, a cheap, calculated gamble hoping for overreaction. Yet American commanders faced a paradox: project strength without feeding propaganda, knowing that too soft invited future challenges while too firm handed Caracas a narrative, a balance rooted in forward deterrence policy where a carrier holding course is not seamanship but national posture. Which is why the patrol ships pushed as close as possible without firing until politics collided with physics and steel drew too near to steel, forcing the moment where restraint met its limit and the message shifted from words to presence as the guided missile destroyer USS gravely accelerated from her escort position, slicing into the narrowing gap with deliberate precision. An Arleigh Burke class warship armed with Aegis systems, missiles, torpedoes, and a 5-inch gun, yet relying on none of them, because in that instant the true weapon was position. A disciplined maneuver holding speed and course, blocking unsafe movement without escalation, letting mass, geometry, and steel reset the encounter and draw a hard, unmistakable line across the dark Caribbean Sea.
They dumped hundreds of thousands of people into our country from prisons. I'm not in love with the people running Venezuela. I love Venezuela. I love the people of Venezuela. But what they've done to this country.
It was a clear difference between a professional Navy and one desperately fishing for footage, because USS Graveless Bow crossed the invisible threshold first, sliding cleanly in front of the Venezuelan formation with surgical precision, a message written entirely in steel. This lane is not yours to control, forcing the Venezuelan patrol ships into the choice they had hoped to avoid: either alter course or risk collision with a 9,000-ton U.S. destroyer that had no intention of blinking. And in that instant the theatrics stopped being cinematic and became brutally practical as inside the USS George Washington's Combat Information Center, Aegis displays refreshed multiple times per second, recalculating CPA, closest point of approach, turning the screen into something closer to a high-speed chessboard where every hull, throttle surge, and course correction counted as a move, some intelligent, some reckless, and some that only looked brave if physics were ignored, because from the Venezuelan perspective the objective had always been simple: force the carrier to yield even slightly, a few centimeters of deviation that could be magnified into triumph on state television. But the Americans did not waver. The carrier held its line with relentless momentum, while the destroyer moved like a knight, leaping into a blocking position that revealed the Venezuelan commanders were playing the wrong game entirely, creating a quiet intensity across both bridges as Venezuelan crews braced at the rails with cameras rolling in hopes of capturing something dramatic, while aboard gravely sailors stood with the same calm posture they would use during a routine transit, veterans of similar encounters with Iranian fastboats, Chinese interceptors, and Russian cutters, executing not improvisation but a playbook refined over decades, adjusting navigation just enough to deny any forward path without tipping into aggression. The bow wave alone firm, unavoidable, unmistakable, and within a minute the attempted blockade collapsed, its shape dissolving as Caracas's carefully staged moment shrank against the confident silhouette of an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer. Yet the encounter was far from over because while gravely controlled the surface picture, the true advantage emerged from above as the deep rhythmic thump of rotor blades rose from the deck behind them, the MH-60R Seahawk lifting smoothly into the pre-dawn sky. Armed not with intimidation, but awareness, FLIR imaging, surface search radar, electronic support measures, and a live data link feeding directly into Graveless Aegis system, turning the helicopter into an extension of the destroyer's combat brain as it banked and circled overhead. FLIR sweeping engine heat pushed near redline, radar tracing course changes, every detail streaming into CIC in real time, transforming information itself into a weapon because anything the Venezuelan ships did, accelerate, turn, rotate a mount, was instantly recorded, legally documented, and impossible to deny, a surveillance angle no propaganda camera could counter, while at sea level Gravely entered its next phase with no radar lock or warning shot, just escalation by posture as the 5-inch gun slowly rotated forward and electronic warfare systems powered up, a visible reminder that pushing further was a decision without rewind, illustrating how the U.S. Navy chooses not to fight by using position over provocation and information over intimidation, combining steel and sky to dominate the battle space without firing a single round as the Seahawk maintained its steady orbit above and 3 Venezuelan ships pressed into an ever-tightening corner under sensors that saw every twitch of their engines, raising the defining question at less than 4 nautical miles. Who would blink first? The crews clutching cameras on Venezuelan decks, or the American sailors holding formation as if nothing at all had changed? An audio exchange would have been a gift, something that could be clipped, framed, and recycled into propaganda back home. So without dialogue, the tension sharpened while narrative control stayed entirely with the U.S. Navy, turning the encounter into a pure test of nerve. Who would reveal weakness first and who would dictate the next move? As inside USS Graveless combat information sent to the tactical picture remained razor sharp. Aegis tracking every subtle change in Venezuelan wakes, bow angles, throttle surges, and micro-adjustments in speed with clinical precision. Computers displaying raw numbers while the sailors reading them understood the reality behind those digits, a foreign navy gambling national pride within collision distance. Until at last, once legal and tactical thresholds were fully satisfied, Gravely transmitted a standard open-channel maritime warning, calm and procedural, naming no ship and raising no tone, simply stating that the American formation was operating lawfully in international waters and nearby vessels were required to maintain a safe distance, a message that did not reduce tension but crystallized it like a thin line drawn across the sea, shifting responsibility unmistakably onto the Venezuelan captains advancing from the deck, whose response carefully avoided the one thing they could not control, recorded voice, opting instead to hoist signal flags in a theatrical flourish meant for audiences back home rather than any operational purpose. The maritime equivalent of shouting for a camera while pretending not to hear the microphone. Yet one fact remained immovable. The U.S. carrier strike group never left international waters, giving the United States every right to hold course, speed, and formation. Because yielding unnecessarily is not de-escalation, but erosion of the rules that keep global navigation stable. And today those rules held as sensors recorded what human eyes confirmed moments later, the lead Venezuelan ship easing its throttle, its bearing shifting by only a few degrees, followed by trailing vessels mirroring the move as the once rigid V-shaped blockade sagged, opened, and quietly dissolved into the rhythm of the sea. No declarations, no dramatic reversals, just a reluctant retreat measured in degrees that spoke louder than any broadcast, unfolding as deliberately as the confrontation began with one silhouette peeling away, then another, then the last, wakes thinning, distance widening, and no acknowledgement offered. While for USS George Washington and her escorts this was not celebration but confirmation that discipline outlasts provocation, that a carrier strike group can diffuse crisis without touching its arsenal, holding course from start to finish as the Venezuelan Navy stepped aside, an encounter that was merely one chapter in a larger arc under Operation Southern Spear, where expanded U.S. naval presence has turned the Caribbean into the outer wall of American border security. By choking cartel finances and narcotics flows long before cocaine, fentanyl, money, and weapons ever reach U.S. communities, demonstrating a doctrine of distance that treats cartel networks as narco-terrorist threats rather than criminals. And this morning standoff was simply the visible edge of that strategy, executed with balance. Firm enough to send a message, disciplined enough to avoid the propaganda trap. As Venezuela sought footage of an American carrier blinking, but instead captured, whether aired or not, a destroyer holding the line, a Seahawk watching from above, and a strike group maintaining heading with unshakable resolve, while beneath the geopolitics lay the quieter human story of sailors who had stood watch through the night, eyes on scopes and hands near consoles, routines drilled into muscle memory, readiness that does not fade when engines quiet, sending a signal across the region that allies recognized as commitment and adversaries recognized as deterrence, shaping how risk will be calculated long after sunrise, proving that in the Caribbean the most powerful message is often delivered without a single shot fired, because victory at sea is not always about firing first but about holding the planned route, defending maritime law, and showing that American resolve still frames the boundaries, steady, disciplined, and unmatched on the water before dawn.